Okay, what if I told you that our entire modern understanding of Western history and religion, for that matter, wasn't just shaped by, great battles or grand philosophical debates, but by an 18th century obsession with Greek statues? I know, it sounds like a massive stretch, right? But the source material we're unpacking today maps out this incredibly fascinating, almost hidden chain reaction. We're going to look at how a simple aesthetic shift, literally just a change in what people considered beautiful, triggered a massive cultural earthquake, one that reached from secret underground societies all the way to the very foundation of modern historical thought. Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this material because, honestly, it plays out like a high-stakes intellectual detective story. We're tracking what the sources call a neoclassical domino effect. We'll see how a passionate, borderline religious devotion to classical art created a ripple effect that reshaped everything from traditional Judaism to the actual timeline of Western civilization. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the new religion of art. Then we'll move into antiquarians and secret societies. Third is Mendelssohn's Jewish Neoclassicism, followed by the Weimar Classicism synthesis. And we'll wrap it all up with Hegel and his Eurocentric history. Section 1. The New Religion of Art. Let's jump right into the 18th century. Enlightenment thinkers were radically challenging old religious frameworks, and they were desperately searching for something new to take their place. The sources highlight this massive aesthetic rebellion going on at the time. For ages, the Baroque and Rococo styles had dominated Europe. We're talking heavy religious dogma, super intricate details, and what thinkers back then saw as just sheer decadence and frivolity. But then, in stark contrast, Neoclassicism emerges. It was austere, it was rational, it championed clear boundaries and this idea of noble simplicity. But here is the kicker. The texts argue this wasn't just a new way to paint or sculpt. It effectively became a new religion of art. People literally began substituting traditional religious rituals with the contemplation of ancient Greek statues. And the guy who practically single-handedly invented this movement was a German art historian named Johann Joachim Winckelmann. Just listen to this quote from his writings on the Apollo Belvedere statue. "From admiration, I passed to ecstasy." Now, the sources emphasize a really surprising historical driver here. Winckelmann's open homosexuality fundamentally shaped this entirely new aesthetic. His whole concept of beauty was directly derived from the homoerotic titillation he felt while contemplating male nudes in ancient Greek sculpture. Which brings us to the concept of griechische Liebe, or Greek love. The texts document how this term became a signal in German literature for the aesthetic and homoerotic foundation of classicism, completely based on male-male attraction. What's absolutely crucial to understand here is what critics call Winckelmann's Pygmalion effect. To him, these marble statues weren't just cold dead stone. They took on a living, erotic spirit. And according to the historical analysis we're looking at, this deeply personal, sexual outlook actually became the psychological bedrock for this entire neoclassical cultural shift. Section 2. Antiquarians and Secret Societies. Now, this new aesthetic definitely didn't stay confined to quiet libraries or stuffy art galleries. It quickly infiltrated some of the era's most elite, secretive underground networks. And when you trace the connections, it gets wild. Winckelmann's career was sponsored by Cardinal Albani in Rome, a massive collector of antiquities. Well, Albani was tight with Philipp von Stosch, an antiquarian and Freemason, who literally used his lodge as a cover to spy on exiled politicians. Stosch then co-founded a Masonic lodge with Charles Saxeville, a key member of the British Society of Dilettanti. And guess who else was in that exact same society? Sir Francis Dashwood. And here is where it gets notoriously rebellious. Sir Francis Dashwood takes these ideals and goes off to found the infamous Hellfire Club. These elite gentlemen's clubs took Winckelmann's classical aesthetics, which, remember, celebrated pagan antiquity and the physical body, and they merged them with esoteric, frankly debauched rituals. The sources indicate they essentially weaponized this new neoclassical framework to completely subvert Orthodox religion and traditional morality. It was a full-on rebellion, just dressed up in Greek marble. Section 3. Mendelssohn's Jewish Neoclassicism. Let's watch the narrative dominoes fall in a completely different direction now. We're traveling to Berlin to meet Moses Mendelssohn. He was often called the German Socrates and was the central figure of the Jewish Enlightenment, known as the Haskalah. Mendelssohn was actually a huge admirer of Winckelmann. Think about how he viewed traditional, intricate Baroque Judaism with its deep fusion of Talmud and Kabbalah. He wanted to replace that with rationalism and noble simplicity, using those exact same neoclassical principles. He reinterpreted Jewish ceremonial laws not as outdated dogmas, but as dynamic, living signs. It's very much like how Winckelmann saw a living spirit in those Greek statues. The crux of this is perfectly captured in Mendelssohn's own words. He openly stated his desire to be the ideal man who would do for the cause of God what Winckelmann did for paganism. He was strategically reinventing Jewish monotheism. By presenting it as a rational, beautiful system based on simple common sense, Mendelssohn's goal was to ensure Judaism could survive, compete, and actually be respected within this rapidly modernizing Occidental culture. Section 4. The Weimar Classicism Synthesis. Mendelssohn's efforts were undeniably influential, but the dominoes didn't stop falling there. This brings us to the absolute cultural titans of late 18th century Germany. Take the Weimar network, for example. You've got Mendelssohn's close friends, Gotthold Ephraim Lessing and the publisher Friedrich Nicolai, who were tied directly to the Illuminati. And this network heavily influenced Johann Gottfried Herder, Friedrich Schiller, and Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. It is honestly wild to discover that all of these legendary literary figures were documented members of or heavily associated with the Illuminati, and they were the driving forces behind Weimar Classicism. Now, this group took Mendelssohn's neoclassical synthesis and pushed it so much further. Weimar Classicism aimed to create an entirely new humanism. But here's the profound irony. While Mendelssohn wanted to use this aesthetic to secure a place for monotheism, the sources point out that figures like Goethe used the exact same aesthetic to try and eradicate the importance of traditional monotheistic religion altogether. They literally replaced the foundational figures of Western religion, like Moses, with Greek figures like Homer. For them, contemplating Greek art and literature became their actual practiced religion. Tracking this evolution chronologically shows you just how fast this spread. It starts in 1755, when Winckelmann kicks off the aesthetic revolution. By 1767, Mendelssohn is applying it to philosophy and religion. By 1786, Goethe and Schiller are formalizing it into a grand cultural movement. And then, as we cross into the 1800s, thinkers within this exact same network, like Herder and Schlegel, start developing concepts of the Volk and early iterations of the Aryan myth. So this aesthetic obsession had now turned completely political and nationalist. Section 5. Hegel and Eurocentric history. Which brings us to the final, massive domino in our intellectual detective story, the philosopher George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. To construct his massive history of Western civilization, Hegel synthesized practically everything that came before him. First, he completely absorbed Winckelmann's idealization of ancient Greece. Second, he integrated esoteric ideas of historical progression derived from Kabbalah and the mystic Jacob Boehme. Third, he formulated this idea of a world spirit that was constantly unfolding. And finally, he used all of this to establish a rigidly Eurocentric historical timeline. To really grasp Hegel, you have to understand his concept of the world spirit, or Geist. He believed world history was simply the unfolding record of humanity's progression toward ultimate self-knowledge and freedom. But, and this is key, he used this concept, which was deeply rooted in the neoclassical paradigm, to strictly rank human civilizations. And his conclusion was highly exclusive. According to Hegel, this spirit of freedom only fully awoke in the Germanic and Christian nations. Hegel praises ancient Greece as a miracle on the undisputed cradle of Western civilization. But think about the stark contrast here. He deliberately marginalizes the ancient Near East and Judaism. Because they didn't fit his specific aesthetic and philosophical ideal of freedom, he labeled them incapable of development and essentially wrote them off as a fossil nation. The sources show how Hegel's worldview actively minimized Greece's profound debt to Eastern cultures, specifically to elevate a purely European narrative. So pulling all these threads together, what are we left with? The sources reveal that a simple stylistic rebellion against Baroque art in the 1700s didn't just change the paintings hanging on the wall. It birthed a deeply aesthetic-resized religion. Driven initially by Winckelmann's homoerotic vision of Greek beauty, it flowed right through the secret societies of the elite, forced a massive reinvention of Jewish theology, inspired the titans of German literature, and ultimately gave Hegel the exact foundation he needed to write a version of history that completely marginalized the East to build the modern Western worldview. Which leaves us with the truly profound question to chew on. As we look at the world today, how much of our basic understanding of history, of religion, and of civilization itself is still secretly governed by the personal aesthetic obsessions of 18th century art critics? It completely changes how you walk through a museum, doesn't it? Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive in today's Explainer. Keep questioning the narrative, and I highly encourage you to go look deeper into the sources for yourself.